Hey guys, it's Sebastian from AskSebby, and today we are going to talk about whether airline status is something you should consider. We'll talk about how to get it, how you might want to approach it, and also finally whether it's worth it. Before we dive into all of that though, you might notice that the background is a bit different. I'm currently traveling, hence I don't really have the normal lighting setup and the background. If you like this video, if you want to support the channel, easiest way to do it is by giving this a thumbs up, especially for vacation videos. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is because I have gotten this question quite a bit, and I think it's something worth talking about since we talk about hotel status quite a bit. With airline status, it's a bit harder, and the big reason is because there's not really that many cards that help you there. There are some cards that make it a bit easier or make it so that you don't have to fly as much, but you still need to fly. With hotel ones, you can either get the mid-tier status or even the top-tier status just by getting that card, and you might not even have had to stay there before in the past. The only exception I can think about for airline status and getting it without actually flying is Delta, but that would involve a lot of spends, which doesn't really make sense for most people because even if you're creating the spends, why would you do it if you're someone that doesn't fly? Unlike hotels though, airlines have an interesting tactic where they have these things called alliances. This means that if you fly a flight within that alliance, you don't have to credit it to that airline, you can credit it to another airline within that alliance. There might be some exceptions to this, but this is generally the case. So on the surface, that sounds pretty confusing, especially to people who don't know what the heck I'm talking about. But a good example of this is if I fly Korean Air, they are part of SkyTeam, and I don't have to credit the miles that I'm flying to Korean Air. I can credit them to Delta, meaning that that flight now counts towards my Delta status. There's three major alliances: Star Alliance, SkyTeam, as well as One World. Most of the flights you're going to take are going to fall off in one of these groups. With all of that out of the way, is it worth considering status, and also what are the benefits of status? I think if you're someone who doesn't fly enough to hit the status requirements, I probably wouldn't worry about this because you're never going to run into that wall. So yes, there might be really good benefits, you might appreciate them, but you're not going to hit those levels anyways, and it doesn't make sense to fly for no reason in most cases unless you can expense it or unless there's another reason where it makes sense. So for example, if you're someone who only flies once or twice a year, probably don't need to worry too much about this. You might still want to think ahead in time so you know what to do in the future, but don't stress out too much. If you fall into this group, the general strategy is to get one of the credit cards that give you basic level status. So if you think about silver status as the entry level status, a lot of these credit cards give you silver lights, a mini version such as free checked bags if you're flying domestic, as well as earlier boarding, and sometimes expedited entry into the airports. The other major group that I don't think should consider this are people who are purely deal seekers. So if you are focused on deals, it might not make sense to even worry about alliances. So imagine if you're someone who flies to Hong Kong and you like United because you want Star Alliance status, but if there's a cheaper deal with Cathay or something else, do you take those cheaper deals? In most cases, I would argue it makes sense to hunt for the deals, but it really just depends on you. I think you can play it both ways. It really just depends on the deals. Generally though, deal seekers probably don't benefit from going after alliance status, so don't worry too much there. What are the benefits of status? You're going to notice status benefits the moment you get to the airport, and technically even before that, but we'll circle back to that. So once you go into the airport, you're going to notice the check-in line. So if you're dropping off bags, this line can be quite long. When we went to SFO recently, there was a huge line for the normal line. But if you go to the other side, even if you have that basic silver status, there's no line at all. I don't think I have this footage on me, but last time I flew Delta, there was a huge line for the normal drop-off line and no line if you had status. On top of this is oftentimes if you do have status, you have higher baggage allowances. So if you have oversized bags, if you have heavy bags, you can bring it and you're not as worried about those fees. Maybe you have a lot of stuff for your trip and it makes it a lot easier. Another big benefit is that you can actually get into the airport area, so getting past security, substantially faster. Really depends on the airport though. For example, at LAX, if you have Star Alliance Gold in the United Terminal, they have a really fast line that has less people than the pre-check line does. So I actually raced Mandy a few times when we were testing this, when we had Star Alliance Gold, where I went into that line and she went into the pre-check line. Even though I had to take stuff out of my bag, there wasn't anyone in that line. Maybe there were 2 or 3 people, but it was effectively an empty line. In all of those cases, I actually got through security faster than her, even though pre-check is oftentimes very fast. With some airlines, if you have status, you can enter lounges. Domestically, I would argue that it's not really that big of a benefit because there's not that many lounges that give you entry unless you're flying internationally. And even then, the domestic lounges aren't that good. If you're flying abroad though, then the lounges are a lot more interesting. So if you're going through Paris and you have SkyTeam Elite Plus, Delta, Gold, and up, then you're going to get access to their business class lounges. Free sauna, free spa, and free food before a flight just makes it a lot nicer. Boarding the plane itself is also going to be a bit faster, so you're going to typically get higher priority. You still get this benefit with credit cards. It's a bit lower down the list, but still a pretty good thing. So for example, if you have status, you might be in boarding group 1 or boarding group 2. If you have a credit card, you might be in boarding group 4. If you don't have status and you're basic economy, then you're boarding group 8. Big advantages of early boarding, which I didn't really care about back in the day, was that you have overhead space. Still not the biggest deal to me because I usually just have a backpack and maybe a roller, and even then at the gate they'll sometimes check in that bag for free. And the other big benefit is just decreasing stress. So I think getting down and being able to take your seat, putting on headphones and just watching something on your phone makes the experience a lot better. I typically like the inside seats because oftentimes I don't sleep enough before trips, so I just start watching something and I knock out. For the most recent flight, I fell asleep before we left the gates, and by the time I woke up, we were up in the air already, and they were starting meal service.
Right after departure, about cruise down to 36,000 feet.
The final big benefit, and this one might be overrated depending on how you think about it, is seat upgrades when you have status. A lot of people think about this as getting upgraded to first class, but that usually doesn't happen, and there's a few reasons. The first one is most people's conception of first class is not really accurate. So when you do get upgraded to first class domestically, you're typically getting a slightly better seat on those small planes. It's nice, it's a better experience, I appreciate it, I still benefit from it and I really like it, but it's not Emirates first class flight that you're expecting. There are some airlines that upgrade you to pretty interesting products domestically. So the interesting ones tend to be from New York or LAX to New York or to Boston because of the length of the flight. And Delta is a pretty good airline in that case because they do upgrade you for free in those situations. To me, the real benefit of status in these upgrades is the guaranteed upgrades to the premium plus, economy, comfort, the whatever bonus level above the bottom area. The reason for this is because if you're flying for a long time, if you're going from SFO to Hong Kong for 14 hours, getting that extra room is so much more comfortable than not having it. My worst flight experiences have been times where my knees are hitting the fronts. I'm not that tall, but still, for that extra 3-4 inches, it makes a huge difference. More of a specific video, but I do think it's going to be helpful as a bit of you guys start to fly more, especially if you are consultants or if you're someone thinking about the future. Hopefully that was helpful, and my question for you guys is, how do you think about status? Are you someone that's not stressed out about it, or do you think about it quite a bit? So for me, initially I was mostly deal focused. Right now I'm still deal focused if it's a very good deal, but otherwise I'm pretty loyal to SkyTeam just because I like their partners and I like the experience out of SFO. In the past I was more of Star Alliance, but given the routes I was flying, you typically don't get upgraded out of SFO because there's too many people of status because it's a United Airlines hub. One final thing for anyone still watching is there's an argument that you don't want to fly the most popular airline out of your airports because you're not going to be able to compete with the consultants who fly substantially more, meaning that they have that super status 1K global services, that level, rather than the normal type status, silver, gold, platinum. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. It really helps us out. If you know anyone else who'd benefit from what we just talked about, feel free to share the video with them because it's probably going to help them out. But otherwise, hope you guys liked it. See you guys next time.